Morning came with a cold brightness that made the shop feel like a temple before a ceremony. On the bench lay terminals, lugs, a terminal block, a torque screwdriver, and a continuity tester waiting like judges. Yesterday, aluminum taught us about oxidation and patience. Today we would learn whether our hands could hold a line between strength and ruin. Harris stood at the panel mock-up and tapped a binding head screw lightly with the driver. Harris, a connection is a promise. It's tight enough to keep it, not so tight that you break it. That is torque. A secure connection lives in that narrow space. Fail it and heat will speak louder than you. He pointed to a tray. Harris, stranded wire, solid wire. Tell me the difference, and tell me why it matters when you land them, Maria. Stranded is flexible and spreads under pressure. Solid holds shape. Stranded needs the right terminal or ferrule to keep the strands together. Solid can deform if crushed. Harris nodded. Harris, and you land both beneath the head where the screw pulls metal to metal. No whiskers of copper straying beyond. No broken strands. No crushed cores. Code compliance is not a rumor. It is a requirement. The foreman rolled in a cart with 2 junction boxes. One was neatly arranged, each conductor trimmed to an identical strip length with color coding honored and a protective cover sitting aside. The other box was a tangle of ambition and shame. Foreman, 2 boxes. One passes inspection. One cooks in silence. You will tell me which is which, and then you will prove it with your hands. Harris opened the tidy box and pointed with the driver. Harris, hot conductors, black and red, neutral white. Equipment grounding conductor, green or bare. Labeling and identification must survive time. Use tags where the service demands it. Use ink that does not lie when the panel warms. Color coding is a language. Speak it cleanly. He lifted the mess. Harris, what is wrong with this picture? Kevin stared at the knot of wire nuts, push-in, connectors, and tape. Kevin, too many conductors under one wire nut. Wrong gauge in a connector not rated for it. A strain relief on the cable entry. And I think that splice lives outside the box once the cover goes on. Harris, good eyes on strain relief. The cable is pulled, the clamp carries the force, not the splices. If you forget strain relief, the first yank turns your work into a trap. Also note box fill. The code gives you a volume limit based on conductor count and device size. Overfill and heat and abrasion do their slow work. You do not cram. You calculate. You choose the right box before the first cut. He laid 3 cards on the table. Ground splice, neutral splice. Harris, build me each. Ground together your equipment grounds. Keep neutrals loyal and continuous. Tie multiple hots as required by the circuit design. But remember, handle ties and 2 pole breakers where a shared neutral demands it. The point is not speed. The point is clarity, and a tight joint that will not loosen when winter shakes the metal. Compression connector here. A rated twist on connector here. Crimp where the listing demands crimp. Solder is not your savior. If you use solder at all, it must live inside a proper enclosure, and only after you have a mechanical joint that holds cold. Heat alone is a liar. Tapped a terminal block mounted on a plate. Harris, land these conductors on the terminal block as the manufacturer intends. Use the correct strip length. Bring the copper in straight. Do not fan out strands. Tighten to spec, and continuity test from point to point and prove your path. If the tester is quiet, you fix the silence before anyone else hears it as smoke. We began. My first task was a neutral splice. I stripped exactly ½ inch and checked the clean copper for scars. I brought 2 whites together, then a third for the pigtail to the device. Twist firm cap with a connector listed for the gauge and count. Tug each conductor. Nothing moved. I labeled the pigtail and tucked the joint carefully to the back of the box. Maria worked a ground splice. She gathered bare and green conductors, added a short pigtail to the yoke screw location, and used a green listed wire nut with a hole for the pigtail tail. She pulled each wire like a truth test. Nothing slipped. She slid heat shrink over an exposed sleeve and warmed it until it hugged the joint like armor. Harris nodded once. Kevin tackled a multi-wire splice with 2 hots and a feed-through. He paused at the connector chart, then swap the small nut for the correct size. Kevin, gauge, and count must match the listing. Wrong size means a loose connection or crushed conductor. Harris. Say it again so your hands remember. Harris walked behind us like a patient storm. Harris. What produces an arc fault? A loose joint? A damaged conductor? Poor termination that lets metal jump the small air between it and what it wants. An arc is a knife that keeps cutting. It produces a short circuit, a direct, unwanted path between conductors. Both can start with your laziness. One whispers, one shouts. Fault current is the cry that trips a breaker. Your job is to give that current a fast path home, so it clears the fault before heat turns wood into memory. He raised a question like a gavel. Harris, after you cap a splice, what must you do? Class. Tug to test, Harris. Where must every splice live? Class. Inside a junction box with a cover. Harris, what is box fill? John. The safe capacity of conductors and devices that a box can hold. We landed conductors under binding head screws at the devices. I felt the old habit rise in my wrist to lean on the driver and crush the copper. I stopped. I set the torque driver and tightened to firm. The conductor did not flatten. It did not pull when I tugged. It simply stayed, a quiet yes. Harris. Inspectors carry torque tools. So should pride. Over-tightening is not strength. It is the beginning of failure. Loose is not kindness. It is heat you have not met yet. The foreman pointed to a cable entering a steel box without a clamp. Foreman, show me strain relief. I installed a compression connector at the knockout, slid the cable through, set the jacket under the clamp, tightened until it held without crushing, and checked that the bare and bonded parts stayed where they belonged. He grunted the small approval that felt better than applause. Harris handed me a device with both copper and aluminum conductors approaching. Harris, you already learned aluminum. Do not mix metals unless the connector is rated for both. If you must join them, you use the dual-rated device. The correct antioxidant compound on the aluminum and torque like a clockmaker, not a blacksmith. I built the joint in a separate box with a dual-rated connector, sealed the aluminum with compound, tied the copper, and labeled the splice can location so the next electrician would not have to guess. Harris tested continuity, then gave a small smile. He dimmed the lights and brought the class to the bench with the ugly box. He pointed at the rat nest of connectors and tape and asked his quiet questions. Harris, what happens here under load? Maria, overheating. The wrong connectors loosen. The insulation bakes. The voltage drop rises across bad joints. Arcing begins, and the damage becomes its own fuel. Harris, cure it. We cut back to clean copper, stripped correct length, rebuilt splices with listed connectors, sorted grounds together and neutrals together, separated hots by circuit, and tied where design required. We added a proper strain relief. We counted conductors, calculated box fill, and upsized the box, because numbers did not care about pride. We labeled circuits and destinations. We landed a protective cover and logged the work in a small book. Because memory is not documentation, quiz came like rain after heat. What does a continuity test check, John? A proper electrical path. Harris, why are neat splices important? Maria, easier to inspect and safer in service. Harris, which metal do you most commonly splice in general branch circuits? Kevin, copper. What causes nuisance trips and hidden danger when you land multiple wires under one screw not rated for it? John, a loose connection heating in parallel paths where they do not belong. He set up a fault simulator. A small switch could place a metal tab against a hot terminal by surprise. Harris, show me that your bond and your splice will make the breaker see the emergency. I armed a test plug at a GFCI on the mock circuit we had just built. Harris threw the tab. The GFCI tripped fast. The breaker behind it stayed calm. The path to ground had done its work. He reset. He moved the fault to neutral. The breaker cleared like a guard dog finally hearing the right sound. The room exhaled. The foreman checked our boxes for covers and screws torqued. He wiggled devices to see if the strain relief truly relieved. He pulled on a pigtail and watched the yoke stay calm because the splice did not depend on the device to carry the burden. He looked at me longer than the others. "Foreman, you crushed a conductor yesterday, John." "I did." "Foreman, you did not crush one today, John." "I did not." He set a small stamp on my glove. It was not ceremony. It was work turning into trust. Harris gathered us for closing. Harris's proper installation is not fashion. It is a chain of choices that keeps families safe. Splice inside a box, use the right connector for the gauge and count. Do not mix metals without the correct device. Control torque. Provide strain relief. Label and identify so the next person can read the story you leave. Code is not a ceiling. It is the floor. You'll stand on it or you fall. I looked at the boxes we had built. The tidy one looked quiet, almost plain. But inside every tight joint and clear label, there was a discipline I could feel in my hands. I understood now what a splice really was. Not just wires together. A bond between my promise and the lives that would trust it. Harris killed the power and handed me the continuity tester. "Harris, put this in your pocket. Tomorrow, the inspector comes. Every splice will be judged. Every label must make sense. Every cover must sit home. If you have not made friends with truth by then, truth will not make friends with you." I slipped the tester into my pocket and felt its weight like a small oath. The shop grew quiet. Somewhere outside, a forklift called and answered. I closed the last box and watched the protective cover settle flat. The screws snug, but not cruel. The circuit felt like a heartbeat under my fingers. Tomorrow, the gate would open to inspection, and there would be no fog to hide in. We would speak in copper and steel and ink, and the work would answer for us.